What's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple of interesting stories for you guys today. The first story that I've got for you guys today, another new physique update from Chris Bumstead. We are just a few days away now from Chris's open debut at the 2024 EVLS Prague Pro this weekend. And we got a very brief video from Chris today just showing a front double bicep pose. He had the caption on this post, "This was my first time in 8 years doing more than one show in a year and getting a fun little rebound post show. I typically stop training for a while after the O to rest my body. I can't lie, the pumps were fun, but getting back on the diet was not." Now, I think that caption is kind of a key part of this. Again, when we talk about how little time Chris had between the Olympia and now. Essentially 4 weeks from the Olympia to Prague. So even the fact that Chris is saying in this caption, getting back on the diet, that means that a portion of that 4 weeks after the Olympia, Chris was off his diet, celebrating, and I'm sure well-deserved. But so when we're talking about how limited of an amount of time that Chris had to really prepare for this open debut, we're talking about even less than 4 weeks. Like I said, getting back on his diet implies that maybe a week or two he wasn't even dieting after the Olympia. So again, I think we should just kind of emphasize to not expect to see a super different version of Chris because the time was really, really short. So, even thinking back to a couple weeks ago when Chris weighed in with Martin in that YouTube video and Chris weighed 260 pounds, that got a lot of people excited because that's like 20 pounds heavier than his stage weight at the Olympia in classic physique. But looking back at that now, that 260 could have been him starting his diet for this Prague show. He was probably only really 260 just because of the rebound from the Olympia and him eating and, relaxing. So we don't even fully know how much of that 4 weeks after the Olympia he spent focused on this show. So again, the just for fun thing, the bucket list thing, him saying he doesn't even expect to win, that's kind of the point that I really want to continue to hammer home going into this weekend. Because I think a lot of people do have high expectations for Chris, but I think a lot of people also have reasonable expectations for Chris based on all these factors. But the reason I want to hammer this home, again, is because if Chris does win this show, his open debut, it really, truly is with bare minimum preparation to switch to open bodybuilding. Like almost none. We're really probably talking about a couple of weeks in the amount of time that Chris made the decision that he's doing this show and then started to prepare for it. Really no time at all. But even that being said, if you put up a still image of the front double bicep that Chris hit here and then the latest front double bicep that we just got from Martin Fitzwater, who I think is the favorite to win the show, Chris honestly looks really good next to Martin. Now, granted, you can't see Chris's legs in his update. You can see Martin's, and I think that's probably where Martin has a little bit of an edge over Chris in that pose. And then also, it's not really the strongest pose for Martin. I would say when it comes to Martin's bicep peaks in particular, maybe not the most clearly defined peaked biceps, and just not the strongest pose, I think, for Martin. And for Chris, with his taper, with his wide flaring lats, and even with Chris's peaks being a little bit weird himself, I think it's a fantastic pose for Chris. And again, not accounting for the legs, just looking at the upper body, I prefer Chris in that pose, which I think is a good sign for Chris, even though we're not going to know for sure until we see these guys actually at scale next to each other, what they look like in these poses on stage. So this is all just pure speculation, but just looking at the still image, Chris doesn't look bad at all in the front double bicep next to a picture of an open bodybuilder's front double bicep. But again, the scale is not really fairly reflected in these pictures, but I think Chris looks pretty damn good there. And then I think if you put that same image of Chris next to the latest image of Shaun from the video he posted a couple days ago hitting a front double bicep, even though Shaun has kind of the better developed peaks to his biceps, again, when you look at Chris's overall taper and just his overall physique in that pose, he doesn't look bad. And that's why I think that's why in my predictions I still had Chris in second And I say it's unlikely for him to win, but I don't think it's impossible, even being smaller than these guys, maybe pound for pound, because I think a lot of that 260 number that we heard is just because Chris is so much taller than Martin, so much taller than Shaun. A lot of that size, a lot of that weight is coming from the height difference and not necessarily, pound for pound muscle mass on the frame. And I think the front double bicep isn't even one of Chris's strongest poses. So for him to look good next to these guys in that pose, imagine Chris in the front lat spread next to these guys, which I think, again, not one of the strongest poses for Martin, who I think is the favorite to win. And honestly, I don't think it's a strong pose for Shaun Clarida either. And again, it's not a pose that Chris gets to hit as far as a mandatory in classic physique. This is the first time in competition Chris will be able to hit that front lat spread as a mandatory scored pose. And then if you look at this comparison of Chris on stage at the Olympia to this, couple days out from his open debut update, I saw people, in the comments of this update saying how much bigger Chris looks. But again, I want to reemphasize how short of amount of time that he's really had. So we're probably going to see a fuller version of Chris than what we see at the Olympia without the weight cap restriction. But again, a couple weeks of him prepping for this show, I can't imagine there's going to be a significant amount of stage weight difference between the Olympia and this Prague show. So when we're talking about looking at a now open version of Chris, I think for this show at least, it's just going to mean probably fuller, maybe a couple pounds heavier. I mean, realistically, how much extra stage weight can you really see in just a few weeks from the Olympia to now? It's just not very likely. So I think what we can expect here is just a fuller version of classic physique Chris competing in an open show. I don't think this is going to look like a completely different Chris Bumstead now that he's doing this open debut, just because of the short amount of time. But if you gave Chris a year, like to next year's Olympia, I think you could see a drastic change because Chris has the frame to carry it. He is such a bigger, taller guy. And so again, all these factors considered, I think if Chris does win this show, considering how unlikely it is, and considering how little opportunity he had to prepare, I think he has to compete in the Open Olympia if he wins. And I haven't seen yet if Urs has already arrived in Prague. I saw that Chris has. Chris is there with Hani. But this is why I think it's not super unlikely that Urs would do it too, because Urs and even Ramon have had the same amount of time to prepare as Chris has. It's not like anybody has had a significant amount of time from the classic Physique Olympia to now to prepare for an open bodybuilding debut. And I think the guys that are shorter than Chris, that are more restricted by their weight limit in classic, like Ramon Dino, a little bit more so than Urs, would be the guys that would have an even greater advantage than Chris by competing in open with no weight restriction and being able to be fuller. And I think Ramon in particular, I don't know. At this point, it seems like it's a little bit late for Ramon to jump in. But like I said, Urs is already going to be in Prague. I wouldn't be surprised if he was a last-minute addition. And we've seen last-minute additions to shows before, even after the competitor list came out. So I don't think it's impossible. And I think all these guys, in addition to being rivals, they had like a great deal of camaraderie in classic physique. I think much more so than the open guys seem to have. And I think their rivalry and camaraderie with Chris was what made this era of classic physique so special. And I could see them competing just to go head-to-head with Chris one more time, even if it is in a different division, because they're all probably in relatively the same shape 4 weeks after the Olympia. Ramon looked great at the guest posing. Urs has looked great in the updates that we've seen from him. And frankly, I think it would break the internet, but I guess we'll have to wait and see who all shows up and if there are any additions made to that list. Like I said, it's happened before. They have changed the list. They have had last-minute additions. They have added names to lists after the list was released. Anything could happen here. And kind of even furthermore, I was looking at the latest updates of Martin Fitzwater today, also a couple days out from actually taking the stage, and I was kind of reminded of the fact that both Martin and Urs work with Stefan, boss of Outlaw. So kind of fueling this speculation of will Urs do it, will Urs not do it. He's going to be there in Prague. He's a previous Prague Pro champion. And his coach is there as well, already coaching somebody in the show. So Urs wouldn't even be at a disadvantage in the sense that his coach wouldn't be there. His coach will be there in Prague, just like Chris has Hani. But again, Martin reiterates in the caption of this post, "Are you ready to see the best Martian that we've ever seen?" Suggesting yet again that he's going to be better than he was at the Olympia. And if that's the case, I think it's going to be very difficult for Chris to beat a top 4 open Olympian in peak shape. And in some of these shots of Martin, you can see cross striations in his quads. He actually looks pretty full in some of these updates. But I keep going back to that front double bicep pose, and I look at Martin's, I look at Chris's, and it makes me think Chris really does have a chance here. I still feel like that there's a really good possibility the top 3 will be Martin in first, Chris in second, Shaun Clarita in third. And I think the bottom 3 of that top 6 will include Horse MD, Christian Wolski, and Andrea Presti. I think Andrea Presti probably placing closer to the top 3 than 6th. But I'm very curious to know what you guys think in the comments down below. Where do you think Chris will place at his open debut, all factors considered? And do you think he has a legit, realistic shot at winning the show? Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification icon if you have not already. And as always, I love you guys, appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power signing out. All right, guys, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Also, check out my Instagram at Nick Strength Power, my Facebook page, which is simply Nick Strength and Power, my secondary YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Vlogs, for vlogs and bonus content that you will not see on this channel. And consider subscribing to my third YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Pokemon, which is all things Pokemon and trading card games, completely unrelated to this channel. So if you're into that, give that one a look. And all links to merchandise and social media will be in the description box below. If you guys want a Nick Strength and Power t-shirt, that will be in the Shopify link below. Have a great day.